Hey, please do not let your job define who you are. What am I talking about? There's a saying that maybe you've heard, and it goes something like this. When I was in grade school, my teacher asked me, gave us an assignment. The teacher gave us an assignment, and she asked us, asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I told her that I wanted to be happy. And she said, I don't think you understand the assignment. And I replied, I don't think you understand life. Have you heard that before? Let me know. Welcome to Goose Pond Hideout. And I'm Rob. And remember, life is short, so it's all about finding your freedom. So that saying is attributed to John Lennon, but according to my research, there's no indication that he ever actually said those words. But it really is an excellent saying. Well, maybe not so much excellent. It's actually a pretty crummy saying when you think about it. It's an accurate saying. How's that? But the teacher gave me an assignment asking me what I wanted to be when I grew up. I told her I wanted to be happy. She replied, I don't think you understand the assignment. And I said back, I don't think you understand life, right? I mean, that's a really accurate saying, because no matter what age you are, if you're older like me, you think back to when you were younger, you people that are younger, is people are always asking you, parents, teachers, people in the community, at church, whatever, they're always asking you, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they're defining that in terms of your job, what you do to make money. And that isn't, if it's about being happy in life, it's about having your freedom. And my generation is probably the ones that really created the issue. I'm a baby boomer and I'm a boomer. And, our parents, the generations that came before us, were pretty much, blue collar. They had jobs, but their jobs didn't define who they were. They went to work and to make money, of course, because, what were your opportunities back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s and that? But, my generation, we all went to college, all got educated, and it was drilled in our heads to, find a job where you can make a lot of money. And I, remember people telling me all the time, get a job where you can make a lot of money, live in the place where you can make a lot of money. And, you may not like where you live, you may not really like what you do, but it's all about making a lot of money, because you can always, go on vacations and do fun stuff because you've got money. And it just never sat well with me. I just never quite understood that concept of living in a place that you don't like, going to work every day doing something that you don't really like, just so you get a big paycheck at the end of the week, and then you're supposed to have fun on the weekends, or have a vacation. And, a lot of people that live that way, and again, my generation, the boomers, all going into business, making, business money, maybe getting an MBA, and just white collar jobs and work 10, 12, 14-hour days, working on the weekends. Just that job is your whole life, and it consumes you just, so you can make a lot of money. And I was pretty fortunate early in my life that I made, choices, and I was able to move up to Maine. And about 30 years old or so, I moved up to Maine, and I was able to have, my own business where I was making good money, relatively speaking, but I was living in Maine. So I was, according to the boomers, I was an exception to the rule. I wasn't living in New York City or Chicago or Los Angeles, or wherever, and to making a lot of money. And a lot of people had second homes up there in Maine. They lived in New York City and Massachusetts, Connecticut, and they would come up on the weekends. In the summer, the moms and the kids, would be up in Maine, and Dad would come up, when you got it, like on the weekends when you got a chance, and the people, lived up in Maine. And Maine was a pretty cool place to live, at least back in the 80s, 90s, and that. Because I moved out of Maine, as you know, to the sailboat in 2005. But most people couldn't live up there at that time, back before the internet and all of that. Artsy kinds of people like, Stephen King lived in Maine, and E.B. White, which is Charlotte's Web, if you don't know. And musicians, people like Don McLean and that. You had to be kind of an artsy, sort of famousy kind of person to live up there. And it was sort of a nice place for them to live, because Mainers, they don't care about that kind of stuff. It never was important to the local folks up there. And a funny story just popped into my head while I'm talking about being up in Maine, is back 20 years ago or 25 years ago or so, because it was before we moved, they shot the movie Empire Falls with Helen Hunt and Paul Newman in it. And I think it was like a series or something, but a movie anyway. They made this movie, Empire Falls, and Helen Hunt and Paul Newman were in it. And of course, they shot it in the local towns, and my wife knew a lot of the people that were involved in the, with the movie and that, doing the second, the local people that were sitting in the diner and things like that, and walk down the street and stuff. But one day my wife she happened to be in the store, the little local grocery store, and Paul Newman was in there shopping and, buying some snacks and things like that. And he's up at he's checking out at the register, and he's standing there and he's holding remember his salad dressing, Paul Newman, whatever, salad dressing, and it has his face right on the bottle. And he's standing there holding the bottle, and he's smiling and he's pointing at it. And the checkout clerk, looks at him and goes, "Are you going to buy that salad dressing, or you're just going to stand there holding it?" She didn't care who he was, right? I got things to do. I got a job here. Move along. And of course, Stephen King, which just ate at all the little local diners and things like that. I'd see him all the time, around town and that. But anyway, I got a little distracted there. It's about, don't let your job define who you are. So how do you do that? How do you not let your job define who you are? Because that's, the world we live in, is that capitalistic, grind out, make a lot of money and spend a lot of money, right? Buy a nicer, bigger house because of your job, and buy a nicer, fancier car because of your job, buy fancier, nicer clothes because of your job, and you just get, trapped in that hamster wheel, and the job sucks you in. And then, like, when you get to retirement age, you don't know what to do with yourself, because your whole life has been your job, and now you're thinking about retiring, and what are you going to do? And actually, you know what? I'll make a whole separate video about that. Your job defining who you are, and how do you retire and be a productive, happy person when you leave the hamster wheel rat race. So we'll do that in another video, if that makes sense to you. So what do? How do you not let that happen? And I've broken it down to 3 things come to my mind. Is think about what you love. What do you love doing? And you've probably heard, read it, people say, the motivational speakers in that is, if money wasn't an objective, if money didn't matter, if you could do anything you wanted to do in life, what's your passion? What would you be doing? And unfortunately, most people have no idea what that really is because they've defined who they are by their job. So they never took the time to think about what they love or what they would really like to be doing if they could do whatever they wanted to do. So think about that. What is it that you love doing? The clock, the time just flies by when you're doing it, and you would just, stay up all night, motivate you to get up early in the morning. What is your love and your passion? And then the second thing is you have to think about, what are you good at? You got to be good at whatever it is. And because you can love something and maybe not be too good at it. So you've got to incorporate the being good at it. And I'm trying to think of like maybe you really love basketball and your passion, your love, you'd play basketball all day long if you could, but you're 5 feet tall. Well, you're probably never going to be able to be a professional athlete given that situation. So, you've got to balance what you love and what you're passionate about with what you're skilled and good at. Now, that doesn't mean you can't, in some cases, like if you want to sing, if you love music and you love playing the guitar and you love singing, and maybe you can't carry a tune in a bucket, well, you can practice and take voice lessons, and you may become skilled enough at that then you could do that. And whatever it is, whatever your skill set is. And again, that's the thing in Maine is, lots of musicians, lots of writers. I had a friend up there that lived in Maine with his family, and he was a cabinet maker. And he had his big building, his shop where he made cabinets, and he actually sold the cabinets. His business was down in, New York City, Manhattan and that. And he would go down there and, measure the kitchens and everything. And then he'd build all the cabinets in his shop up in Maine. And then he'd load with his workers, load everything up in his trucks and his vans and drive down to the city and install super expensive high-end cabinets down in, New York City. So he was able, his passion, his love, what he was good at. And then that actually is bringing up the third thing is, what can you make money at? What are people be willing to pay you for? What kind of business model can you create so that the thing that you love is the thing that you're skilled and good at, is the thing that people are willing to pay you for. And, he had a very, very successful cabinet making business, living in Maine, but, doing the cabinet high-end installs and that down in New York City. So that's the kind of thing that, you've got to be thinking about is those three things, love, skill, and making money at it, right? So I was fortunate that I could make a pretty good living and able to live in a place like Maine where people would, vacation to and have their second homes at. And because they're all living in a place that they can't stand and want to get away from. So I'm hoping that's making sense. Is, again, drop me a comment, let me know, and I'll be thinking about that second video about retiring from your job that you don't like, because life is short and I want you to be finding your freedom, right? Freedom!